Here.
Mayor Rod is online.
No, he's here.
No, sorry, Mayor Rob.
Oh,
Sorry. I got a Rod and a Rob. My is Mayor. We'll stick the last. Yeah, Listenberger is online. Mayor James Mueller. Mayor Rod Person.
I am here.
Duly noted.
Oh, no.
Councilman Brian Tanner.
Here.
Councilman Tony Violi.
Here.
Commissioner Susie Wyrick. Mayor David Wood.
Yes, sir.
We have a quorum of present. We will be voting in person today. I do, since that roll call, I do want to mention that we have two new council members, or two new policy board members, both from councils. From South Bend City Council, we have Kenneth Lee.
Welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And then from St. Joseph County Council, we have Brian Tanner.
Welcome.
So I wanted to make sure to note both of their attendance today, as it is their first meetings. I wanted to welcome them aboard.
Welcome aboard. On our agenda is you can look through the minutes. If no revisions, I'd like a motion to approve. Motion.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have a few reports here. As far as the selection, pretty much chairman selection and nominating committee for the policy board, we need a nomination for a second.
Treasurer. Sorry, that's a typographical on my part. So yes, Councilor Root, who has been with the MACOG policy board for, I believe, about 7 years, has stepped off of the policy board. He is C3 for his council, so he'll be wrapping up his terms of service with the St. Joseph County Council at the end of the year. And so first, to thank Councilman Root for dedicated years of service to MACOG as well as St. County. But as he stepped off, we have received his replacement, Councilman Tanner. But that does create, for the first my tenure here, a vacancy out of cycle on our officers or our executive committee. And so we do have to do an out of sequence than what is typical nominating for the policy treasurer, so we can fill that spot for the rest of this calendar year. And then probably moving forward, we would treat that role as part of the rest of the rotation. So for those that are new or don't know, our officers typically all roll up as long as they're continuing in their elected capacity. And so usually our secretary then becomes second vice chair becomes first vice chair, etc. And so historically, the treasurer has always been a single county person. But that was back when we absolutely have a check signer and it was much more complicated to get signature checks. And Councilman Root's tenure as our treasurer, I don't know that we've had to have him sign any checks in the past 5 years. And so we would probably start a new tradition where that's just part of the roll up, and you would start at the treasurer role, then become secretary, then become vice chair, etc. So we would need some volunteers to become part of the nominating committee for the policy board role. So the great thing about volunteering for the nominating committee is that you potentially can make sure that you're not on.
I'll volunteer.
Oh,
It's a shame. Shame, Tina, you gotta do it like that.
I'm not going to ask for motivations for the volunteers. I'm just going to accept the volunteers.
What are the responsibilities?
We'll have a call, assuming essentially, where we'll talk through the potential candidates who have either expressed interest or who might be interested, and then I'll really take care of at that nominating committee's directive contacting those individuals and or contacting the individual, and I'll really handle the majority of the work. It's just within the next month, you would need to be available for a Zoom call / phone call.
Put my name.
If anyone is interested, please feel free to reach out to me, and you added between now and July, we'll have a committee meet to discuss filling that role for the treasurer.
Great, thank you. Next on our list is Debbie. Wasn't anything we voted on there, right?
Nope.
Good morning, everyone. You should have the April 2024 financial report. All right, through the month end of April, our total expenses for the year are $9,527,426.33. I do want to point out that we have two new board members that we run on a fiscal year, so we're a July to June. So just since most people are calendar year, they look at this, oh, we're only 4 months in and we're at 9 months. Really, we're getting towards the end of the year. Our cash balance through the end of April was $2,296,682.64. And our cash dispersed for the month of April was $689,913.60. Are there any questions or that we pulled from the report?
Approved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Carries.
All right, our next item is the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget. As Debbie pointed out, MACOG runs the state fiscal year, so we run from July to June. So with July approaching, we are presenting the fiscal year 2025 budget consideration. The budget highlights projected revenue to match expenditures of about $13 million. You can see on the in packet, this is the yellow document. On the third page is the comparison of the fiscal year FY24 to FY25. There are a number of different changes that I want to walk through. Salaries increase as an item about 4.5% to continue to provide competitive for our staff. Contractual services is up, as shown here, 13%. Not familiar, that does look like a very large contractual line item, and it is. But the biggest driver of that contractual service line item is operations of the interurban travel over in Elkhart and Goshen. And so the signed a new contract there, a 5-year contract. So there are updated numbers, but also have some news that Leah will share with you later with our brownfields program, where we might see some additional expenditures in that program, as well as our new program, the selected event for, and a few other items. So we're just taking a little bit of a buffer there, seeing that go up. But this is done by State Board of Accounts, a third party hired by State Board of Accounts. It's been with compared to where it's been in previous years. Last year is a little bit higher. So largely that's an estimate on actual expenses from this last year. So I'm going to provide an updated number there. As well as that, some minor changes throughout the rest of the numbers, but we get down to travel and fish. We see a larger increase of about 37% there. You'll recall in our FY24 budget, we're already over that line item. This is largely because we're in year 2 of a new program, AmeriCorps, and that does see a lot of different travel and mileage for those members, as well as our program director. And while we have grant funding that offsets that, since it was a newer kind of program, those expenditures weren't really that's reflected in FY24, and so FY25, trying to figure what that real cost is. Have a number of different software and licenses that are renewing, so we have some increases there, as well as some potential new software and licenses. So that's driving our office. This is speculative on my part, but the St. County Commissioner are working through their plan of what they do when it comes to the county city building. We currently rent from them, and the city of South Bend is currently working towards moving out of that building, which would open 3 or 4 floors in the space as the county commissioners and county council work through and for what they want to do with that change. We're just starting to plan for keeping our options open, which would either allow us to look at additional or look at new space, or if the option was presented there, the county updated some space and we had updated space in the county system, that we would have a to pay more in rent. It's been a few years since our rate increased, but so that's largely just trying to accommodate for any potential changes, depending on what we feel like we might need to do for office rent. For us to go completely into a private space, that number would still be low compared to our actual space needs.
What are your space needs?
Probably about 7,500 square feet, roughly speaking. That would be inclusive of break space, steam rooms, etc. We could do a smaller space, but we had sacrificed that.
What's the private market estimate per square foot?
About 22 per square foot, depending on improvement and how great we could negotiate. So there are the office market, at least in downtown South Bend, there are availability are out there, and so we might be able to get that, but poses a lot of challenges to us. I just think of the small things of the headache of going through all of our federal systems and updating our address, let alone letterhead, let alone IT, let alone a lot of other things, just the disruption. But we want to keep our options open. Moving on, in previous conversations with the board, we have talked through how right now there is a equipment and vehicles line item, and how, especially for new board members, it can be confusing to see a $4 million equipment line item. Really, the majority of that line item is driven, pun intended, by our rolling stock vehicles, urban trolley. And so, request this year, for the first time, we are presenting a budget that separates those two line items out, where we have a new line item of rolling stock and vehicles. So that's why there isn't necessarily a historic number there. But we're estimating, based on the 3 new flyer vehicles that we have, large buses that we have on order for the transit system, as well as then 5310 vehicles. Those are vehicles for service providers for individuals with disabilities, seniors. All those different vehicle purchases would be 3.2 million. And then the equipment and furniture line item is going down 89%, nearly 90%, largely because it's in the previous line item that we just discussed, and around $400,000. That would be inclusive of IT, computers, upgrades, equipment for traffic counting programs, all sorts of different purchases still make for programs. And then
How is that not in software and licenses?
our software and licenses, how at least historically viewed it, is as the actual subscriptions and the licenses for, say, like Esri, our mapping products, or those kind of languages and softwares as a service, and that equipment and furniture is much more the hardware that server, those kind of items. If we needed an SQL license for our server, the SQL license would go in software and licenses. But if we were actually buying a new server, the actual physical product, that would be in equipment. That's how we've at least historically viewed them. Yep.
So, James, are you going to trend clean stock moving forward? Are you going to discuss that as a separate line item on the budget sheet or on the statement of expenditures?
Yes, that would show up moving in the new fiscal year as a separate line item.
Okay.
Yep, that would be reflective.
That's a nice change. And thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's always been a little bit of a harder one to look at, so we wanted to provide that clarity. Moving forward with publications, ads and marketing, that's going down. That's largely reflective of where we've been at in real world costs, with either doing less of that or costs not being as intensive. Insurance and bonding, that is not our fringe benefits of major medical insurance, but insurance on things like our transit shelters and those kind of items, that's going up. So trying to be reflective of that insurance cost increase. And then AmeriCorps Living Allowance, AmeriCorps members, those are grant funded, and we have applied for more in that program. And so what's really in that living allowance increase, 20%. We've just asked the grantor for more funding. So that's reflective of that. And then the last item is because of the way that we handle our indirect costs, all of those things that in our cost allocation plan we consider to be indirect. So that's things like services or staff time that is too difficult to break into individual charged line items. These are all those items that are considered indirect costs that we charge to our grant programs. Because of the way that it works, we have a rate, and we calculate up front what we think it's going to cost, direct costs to do the things, but then the year we go back through and figure out how much did it actually cost. And then in the budget, depending on if we took too much in indirect expenses or we didn't take enough in indirect expenses, the next year then reflects a positive or negative amount. So that's why there's this big change there, swinging from one to the other. And that represents overall about a 5% increase in the overall budget. A lot of those increases are necessarily driven by grant programs where we have some additional funding. And so I'm happy to try to answer any questions related to the fiscal year 2025 budget.
So with the increased salaries for our fringe benefits not increasing?
Some of the fringe benefits are increasing, and they're assumed to increase, but it is a calculated rate based on our salaries, and there is some increase, but you will see that in our reflected, our rate is different. Okay, hold on, let me explain this. So we do cost allocation plan every single year. Cost allocation plan creates based on what we're assuming our direct salaries are going to be versus the cost of all of our fringe benefits. We then apply a rate to create a fringe benefit. And so can't recall off the top of my head FY24 fringe was versus the direct salaries, and that could lead to, based on those calculations, a higher line item than what we were actually using. And you'll see within our budget from FY24 that our fringe budget line item is only at about 65 spent.
Yeah, but
Based
is
on,
that based on vacancies? Or, I mean,
it is, or based on actual costs. So
I was gonna have the same question. I was gonna get to the same question, but there are some that took certain benefits that and others.
that
didn't.
or a family insurance plan, if an employee and they're single or they're still on their family plan, something along those lines, there are actual protections versus the actual plus, right? As well as then how much direct salaries have expense versus our rate. And that would then create our different capture.
But that would only be for the year we're in, not
Correct.
the projected year. We project based on head count.
Correct.
And we're at the highest rate.
So every year we do a new cost allocation plan.
Yeah.
That process starts in around February. And so we have a new rate for our cost allocation plan, which includes our new fringe, which is for FY25. And I can't remember off the top of my head if our FY24 fringe rate was 65%.
Right.
And year based on vacancies, based on this, we're at 63%. Or the other thing is, in previous years, if we've kept too much, just captured not enough, there is a minus on that as well. So I divide any of that. I just don't have that at my fingertips.
Well, the other question I had was relative to the 4.5, and I guess it kind of dovetails on her question around vacancies. The 4.5 are straight 4.5 across the board, or are there
MACOG.
new positions that you're bringing on that you didn't have this year?
Yeah, great question. So we do performance evaluations, and pay raises are provided based on performance. So we do a straight, each employee gets 2%, 3%, whatever. It's based on working through the annual process is received different.
Correct.
The 4.5% is really driven by increases in salary, not necessarily positions.
How did you determine what your rate? Did you use a standard that you were going to look at? I know in the past, I think it was looked at a COLA that was thoroughly driven. Did you monitor around that or?
Yeah, so we benchmark most of our employees based on organization across the rest of the state and try to make sure that we're providing competitive wages. We also do a lot of looking at you all pay your employees because we're all in a similar line of governmental work, and we want to make sure that while we would love to add capacity by having one of our staff members work for you, we would also like to retain our staff members, and so we make sure that we're in a competitive market. I don't think we have anything as sophisticated as what you're discussing, but largely trying to make sure that we're providing cost of living increases, but at the same time staying competitive with the market.
And my last question is around the AmeriCorps. Are we adding any additional? It looks like it's going up, but are we staying with the number that we had?
No, it's would be looking at additional capacity there.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Very good program.
There's one things I had back to the office rent that you had. So, I mean, if you talked about possibly getting to where you would have a full floor, is that roughly what the 107 would be at this rate, expanded out to the additional square footage?
Yeah, something in that range. If what we've always, and what I have plans literally drawn up that we've had for multiple years, is that we would have an entire floor in the county city building. And if that was to be the case, obviously it's not exactly Class A space. And so, the Class A private sector market more in the 140 a year. And so the incremental increase for us, if we were to get there, maybe more in the 100,000 range. I don't think that spring in July, maybe getting there, we're going to be under the old rent rate. And it might, the city doesn't really move out until the end of the calendar year, more quarter one next year. And so this is really speculative, but allowing for in our budget that space that if we either get that new or to think through that we need to look at private space that we've started to accommodate for a larger rent.
Sounds good.
There's no thought on moving locations from St. Joe County to like Elkhart County.
I was waiting for the same.
We will.
I'm always a supporter of my county.
That's a no comment.
We as an organization have been in the county setting in St. Joe County since our creation in 1970, and we prefer not to open up the conversation because I'm sure many communities, so Mayor Jenkins will often point out that Napanee is very central to all 4 counties.
And they probably
and
have better
so-
parking.
Yeah.
Then we
So-
should walk.
As of this point, we're really just trying to see to get that whole floor in the city building. But we appreciate the invite.
I'm also assuming that the roller stack has always been a part of the equipment and maintenance line item. So to change that, we can also.
Do you need a motion to approve the budget?
We do.
I would like to make a motion to approve the budget.
We got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So next looks like we've got budget's done. Secretary Ron, you got anything to start?
No, you see the main modifications, they were in the packet. Got them?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you. Old business, James, anything there?
It's a set. Only new business.
We're already for new business.
All right, Caitlin will come up and present our resolution.
Good morning.
Good Lord.
So I have 3 items under Transportation Resolution 16-24. The first is favorably new to us. You may recall that earlier this year we were quoted over $4 million for the charging and fueling infrastructure that was offered by the highway. And this is adding in PE and construction for the grant. We're still kind of working through the grant agreement process, but hoping kind of after the fiscal year that that project can get underway. I'll fill in any other.
Yeah, we presented on before, but the scope of work, it's 32 level 2. That's the 250 volt chargers. That is essentially that you can get about 5 miles or so of electricity in about an hour, roughly speaking. Those are largely for kind of travel within the region. There are 18 of those that are throughout urban areas and about 14 of them that are programmed for some of our smallest communities and rural areas, making sure that all towns have an opportunity as the vehicle industry moves more and more of their vehicles to electric. We want to make sure that everybody has infrastructure, as well as then there are locations that are programmed for our fast chargers where you can get like 80% of your battery in about an hour. And that is 2 locations on US 30, 1 near Plymouth, 1 near Warsaw, and then the last one is at the South Bend International Airport. So that's the whole scope of work. Working through signing the grant agreement right now, but we're able to have this in the transportation improvement program so that we can move forward with preliminary engineering and all of those steps.
Like to have a motion for.
So this is a weird one because it's combined with these 2 end ones.
Okay.
So we apologize. We have item B and still.
Yeah. So the next 2 are INDOT and initiated items. The first one is increasing preliminary engineering federal funding by $278,405. This is for ADA sidewalk construction at various locations within the Fort Wayne district. And item C is adding in a project. This we'll be adding in an environmental linkages study for the State Route 2 corridor from the west junction of US 20 in LaPorte County to the junction of US 20 in St. Joseph County. A little bit of kind of background or timeline for this project. Anticipating that they'll put out an RFP for consultant services sometime in September and have a select sometime made in October. The bulk of public outreach will happen next year in March, with anticipation that the full study will be completed by the end of 2026. And so this will include a lot of stakeholder engagement to identify purpose and need of the corridor and to help and kind of develop those preferred alternatives that will assist in prioritizing capital improvements in their statewide call. If there are any questions about for this corridor, I know we have Mike, online. If you have any questions, he's happy to answer.
And just context for those familiar with this part of St. Joseph County, this is where GM has announced the future plant, as well as, which is about $1 billion or so investment, and also where AWS
3.5 billion.
Is that where we're up to now? Yep. All right. And then AWS has announced very large for web services, which is 11 billion.
12.3 billion.
All right. So there are some very large land use impacts affect this corridor. So looking at kind of that access management along this entire corridor and how it operates and needs to be done to be able to handle those economic development projects, as well as the traffic generated in that area. So really looking at that to make sure that that corridor can be updated. It does look a little funny because if you look at it, it's State Road 2 from US 20 to US 20. But that's just, you know, the land from essentially that scope of the project. So.
James, can we also throw in the food center for Amazon in Elkhart County, as well as the final stage center that they're opening down there, which will increase volume of traffic in and around that, which is out there where the departure is kind of a first stage building. That's how they explained it to us. The other building that they're opening up around our aeroplex is a final stage, which will have a lot of truck traffic go in and out of the aeroplex in order to reach last stage customer, which will be you, my wife more so. But at any rate, traffic will increase dramatically in those when that opens up, and it actually is looking at a 2025, I believe. Isn't that what they indicated? 2025 opening. So I don't want to lose sight of, you know, the relationship to build support structure around it.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that further. INDOT's kind of look at how State Road 2 will function moving forward because of the kind of services and GM facilities that are going out there. Happy to talk with you about that.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about the data as well as the AWS as to what goes in and out of there. I mean, what's the truck? What is the truck traffic kind of?
Virtually, they're considered significant. It is a data center. It is a data center. There'll be traffic when they're updating equipment every 4 to 6 years, but outside of that, it'll just be the 400 to 1,000 employees coming to and from work each day. That'll be the traffic, and a highly secure facility because everybody wants their data safe.
Is that both Microsoft and?
The Microsoft facility that was discussed is protected and danger area along the toll road.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be a completely separate facility in a different location.
Correct, but same type of
facility,
Okay.
just various scales.
Got it. Thank you.
And I believe IBM and Amazon also make very significant commitments to fund some of the infrastructure improvements, which is probably why it's far more interested in this particular stretch, because there's some private compensation that's going to afford the.
So, I mean, that's right.
Yeah.
So with that, we look for a vote for these approval.
So
Yes,
moved.
Second.
got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, transit.
It's transit resolution 17-14. You'll notice in your application packet, well, there's 4 line items related to Janesville. There and some of their items, some of those could have been could be processed as donations. Needed to be processed as an amendment. This is to increase federal funding by $9,955 for their tire.
Lease time.
They do.
know about lease.
So Amy Hill, their current CEO, our and president, talked at the TTAC about they've leased tires for decades. It's a fairly common thing within public transit, and it actually does save them a lot of money leasing tires.
Because of retreading those tires.
I'm not a tire expert. We at MACOG not done tire leases, but there is a cost savings to them over leasing those tires.
For a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion.
All right, I'll present resolution 1819 and 20. These are all related and board, so we could probably approve these all in one joint approval, but I'll walk you through them. So the way that Federal Transit Administration provides funding, they provide funding to an urbanized area. And so they say the South-End urbanized area, you are receiving for fiscal 24, $5.7 million, or in this case, $5,766,404. They do not say that goes to this transit provider and this provider and that transit provider, and here are numbers to each of those transit providers. They just provide a lump of funding to the urbanized area. It is then our responsibility as a metropolitan planning organization to essentially come up with the split of those funds in working with these transit providers. So we have a long established process, and really we receive apportionment. We walk through a data-driven spreadsheet that provides a hypothetical between rail and bus, walk through local context and different scenarios, and then we have all three of these translators meet, as well as partners up at Southwest Michigan Plan Commission. We share that urban area with that, Niles. And then we walk through willing to do what is everybody wanting or not. And often happens, which is what happened this year, the transit provider actually agreed to go with a percentage increase, was the increase that the entire urban area saw. So I don't remember off the top of my head, but let's say urban area saw 3.74 increase in funding. Everyone shared that increase, right? So everybody's number is going up at equivalent value. And so for the 5306 funding, the primary kind of operating and capital pool of funds for transit providers, the split is presented. NICTD, which is South Shore, receiving about $2 million. You can see the number on your screen or in your packet. Transpo, about $3.4 million, and Niles Dial-A-Ride at $305,000. They have all mutually agreed to that. If we go to resolution 1924, there we go. This is 5337 funding, which is state of good repair funding. This is only available to transit providers that are receiving that are either rail or providing rapid transit There is obviously a typographical error here because there's two different numbers. NICTA is the only eligible transit provider for all of this funding because it does not provide bus rapid transit, nor does Dial-A-Ride, and neither operate any route. So the entire pool of funds goes to South Shore Line. I believe 4,356,005. I think I can confirm that. I'll double check. So that pool of funds goes to NICTA. And then in the next slide, resolution 24, 5339, this funding is for bus and bus facilities. This is provided for bus and bus facilities. It's capital equipment or capital expenditures. This is a much pool of funding. It's just all to do with how Congress funds different programs. And so that total apportionment is 332,000. That mutually, Transpo and Niles, they get together, they work through what each of them need, vehicle purchases or facility readiness. And they have agreed this year to transfer around 250,000 and not receiving 80,000. They have actually agreed to those numbers and this overall budget. Can pull up the 5337 number just to provide some clarity around that typographical error that we made. But to answer questions while I pull that up, again, all of the providers have agreed to these numbers. The number for 5037 was the 4,356,005. So that is the full amount that's going to.
Make a motion to approve 1824 corrected amount 2024.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion. Thank you.
Resolution 2124, a very related and interconnected item. So we have a memorandum of understanding, an agreement with all of these transit providers, as well as our partner, Southwest Michigan Commission, to how this process is handled, how we work through 5307 funding and 5337 and 5339. It is updated every 5 years. We were needing to update it just to be more current. There really weren't any major substantive changes to the process. Everyone's pretty agreeable to the process. Really just make that we're citing recent infrastructure laws, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, those kind of things. Really no big substantive changes. I report that everyone signed this already. It's for MACOG. So we have signature from Southwest and City of Niles and Public Transit and NICTA. And so we're just asking for the board to provide approval for me to sign that document so that we can have an updated agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
All right. We have a few presentations today. They could be fairly short presentations. Partners over at EPA have asked to do a presentation on programs called Community Change Grant. And so I believe we have someone here virtually with us from EPA that was going to present on this program to make you aware of one of those opportunities that are out there. Hold just a second. We don't have audio. I don't know. Just take it away. Yeah. All right, try now.
Good morning.
There we go. Have your audio.
So, my name's Jesse Cassiano. I am the EPA Region 5 Community Engagement Specialist stationed here in Chicago. I'll give a quick presentation on our Community Change Grant. The grant closes November 21st, so that's the most important thing to remember at this time. Next slide. Just a quick overview. Next slide, please. So through the Inflation Reduction Act, we received $3 billion for grants to be awarded by September 30th of 2026. So they are good for 3 years with no extensions. That's been one common question asked from folks interested in applying for the grant. Next slide, please. So the goals are to fund community-driven pollution and climate resiliency solutions, invest in collaborations with partners working with and for communities, unlock access to more significant resources, deliver TA and capacity building support, and strengthen community decision-making powers. Next slide, please. So our first track is anywhere from $10 to $20 million, and there are 150 of these awards available. Our second track is a little bit smaller, 1 to 3 million, and there's only 20 of these available. In our technical assistance programs, next slide, please. So type of technical assistance available, pre-award and post-award, and equitable resilience technical assistance, and there are links for this. Next slide, please. Threshold. Next slide, please. So these, as I said earlier, must be completed within 3 years. The most important thing to remember for this part is it has to be a community-based organization partnering with either city, municipality, school district, county, or a college, university, or another community-based organization. Next slide, please. Or federally recognized tribe. Next slide, please. So you can have collaborations with CBOs, governments, and also with this grant, let's say I'll use Fort Wayne as an example. Fort Wayne partners with a nonprofit organization for track 1. With that, you can, we'll say Fort Wayne's the primary and the CBO's secondary. You can reverse your roles. So the CBO can be the primary and Fort Wayne can be the secondary. So you can technically apply for 2 grants. And with that being said, you see 10 million to 20 million or 1 to 3 million. It does not have to be just one project. So if the community organization wants to do 2 and Fort Wayne wants to do 2, as long as you hit that threshold, you're fine. When folks see 1 to 3 million, 10 to 20 million, they tend to think we can't think of one project that big. So no, you can do up to 4. Is my recommendation. Next slide, please. So the projects do have to benefit disadvantaged communities using either CGIST or our EPA EJ screen, and the links are on the map or on the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. So here's our target areas: disadvantaged unincorporated communities, tribes in Alaska, tribal communities, southern borders, and U.S. territories. Next slide, please. And just an overview, next slide, please. Increase climate resiliency, reduce local pollution, improve public health, center meaningful community engagement, build community strength, reach priority populations, which would be underserved communities, and maximize integration across our projects. Next slide, please. Overview and examples: education and training programs, environmental advisory boards, collaborative governance activities, participation in governmental funding and budgeting process. Next slide, please. This is a rolling application, so first come, first serve. We are already reviewing grant applications, and as you saw earlier, there are only a certain number of grants available. I would highly suggest the sooner the better. That's all I can say at this moment. One thing with the rolling application that's different than some of our previous grants is, let's say you submit an application and they find some errors or this doesn't seem to meet the criteria, you'll receive your application back, then you can make changes and resubmit. In the past, it was if you were denied, you didn't have that chance to resubmit. So next slide, please. Oh, debriefings and resubmission. Next slide. Key points. So the NOFO is 95 pages long. So I can send the same overview that you're looking at now to Ms. Leah, so she could share it with you, and with my email address in case you have any questions. Next slide. And there's our links. Next slide. Oh. NOFO modifications. Currently, there have been no mods. I can send the list of frequently asked questions we've received so far regarding this grant. And final thoughts. Next slide. So I know that was a lot of information very quickly. Any questions?
Any questions? I want to be able to thank you for being able to be with us. You know, we want to make sure that as opportunities come up, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act or IIJA, there's a ton of new grant opportunities that are out there. There are a lot of different ways to be looking at federal funds. So really, if you as a municipality are working with a nonprofit, profit or community organization, especially around this reduce pollution or increase climate resilience or those kind of things, those are things that you're working on or that are important to your municipalities. This could be a good avenue to explore. And so we want to make sure that you all had more information about it. So Thanks for being able to join us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. In person here, we have Catherine with Cool Design, who is going to share an update with you. We are working on a regional transportation safety plan, and so she's going to give you a brief highlight. Catherine, over to you.
So just we are working. Whoops. Quickly.
There's a lag. That's great.
We are working on projects that are, this is a project being funded by the Federal Highway Administration to increase safety throughout the region, and specifically work eliminating fatalities and serious injuries in the region. The federal government has provided funding for a variety of projects in this area across the United States. Is currently touching about 70% of the population of the United States right now through these projects. Some of the projects have, in addition to funding planning projects, they're also funding implementation of safety projects. And I want to highlight a few types of projects that might be of interest to those of you in the MACOG region. Things like this pedestrian crossing improvement in Baker City, Oregon. Reminds me of a project that was funded during the last cycle in the city of El Paso, Texas, that received $9.1 million to do intersection safety improvements and do other things related to safe routes to school, like encouragement and engagement for a fairly small community. Another type of project might be road diets and bike lanes, as you're seeing here. This is a demonstration project in Kansas City, Missouri, which reminds me of a project that just got funded in Joe County in Nevada, where the metropolitan area was awarded $8.9 million to implement multiple improvements, including its and bicycle lanes. Another type of project, safe routes to type projects are being funded, which include installing sidewalks, installing clear use paths, ADA ramps. Billings, Montana received funding for a project like that. As I think about this region, I think of potential side path projects that could accommodate people who are biking for recreation, but also transportation and horse and buggy users. This is a rendering of a project in Ohio. Webster County, Iowa will just awarded $8.5 million in funding to improve safety in 32.5 miles of road that were identified as high-risk locations for crashes and fatalities. Here are some other side path type projects that currently exist in communities. Another project funded was in Detroit, Michigan, that really looked at 56 intersection improvements around bus stops to improve safety for transit users, other folks, and the project funded to the metropolitan government of Asheville, Hudson County, improved connectivity between the city of Asheville and the surrounding residential areas. In addition to the SS4A funding, you've got NDOT funding, new safety NDOT dollars. This plan will help you think about accessing. The deadline for that project is coming up a little sooner, and so as part of this planning process, we're going to offer a handful of communities an opportunity to do a 2 to 4 hour workshop / meeting / tour with a small group of decision makers in communities. If you are a community that is thinking about applying for safety dollars, either those NDOT dollars or the Safe Streets and Roads for All dollars after the first of the year, I'm going to leave my card here. I'd be happy to talk with you, and maybe we can put together some tours and help you think about where you've got high risk areas and pull together a team of people to get in front of thinking about those applications and potential countermeasures to position yourself well for funding. Just a reminder of where we're in this process. We'll be done with this process in December. Right now, deep into the existing conditions portion of the process. where we're doing a data review, both the systemic data review and the crash analysis to understand fatalities and serious injuries are currently happening in the region and what might happen given the current road design and context. We've also completed an equity analysis, which we presented to the task force yesterday. Got great feedback on that and on the first draft of the crash analysis. We are about to present to the MACOG team a policy review, which looks at not just transportation policies and funding policies for transportation safety, but also other policies in the region that can influence transportation safety in the region. We're also doing a bit of engagement. There'll be an online survey and map that we should live next week. We'll push that out to all of you to promote on your channels for folks in the general public to input to this process. And then we're doing a series of pop-up engagements, particularly in areas where there are populations of folks who would be less likely to interact with the map and population of folks who have historically been not part of these sorts of planning processes to get a real understanding of what's going to work well in your community. If there are sites for pop-up engagements you'd like to share with us, there's a link here, also on MACOG's website, and we'll push that out to you if there are particular places or people like us to focus on, particularly those populations of folks who've historically been underserved in planning processes. In late August, we start crafting recommendations, which will be based in, which will be very heavily based in what we see in the data, both the crash data and those analyses process, and in what we hear in the engagement process, not just the general public, but with folks in the task force, with MACOG staff, and other stakeholders throughout the region. The final plan will be ready by December, and we will also be delivering a guidebook to the region to help you think through how to put together demonstration projects if there are things that sound particularly interesting to you, but you want to try first and see how they work on your road with low-cost materials that are easy to remove if in fact you decide to buy them. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll also hang around for a bit afterwards if people would like to talk about that.
So road diet, what is that?
So that's when you realize that you've got too much capacity on your road, and you don't need the number of general travel lanes that you've had. Making those, maybe removing some travel lanes, allocating that space perhaps to increase sidewalk facilities or bike lanes, or just pretty buffers in the downtown area. One of the things that really leads to fatalities and serious injuries is high speed, and one of the things that leads to speed is roads that are, either the lanes are too wide or there are too many lanes. No driver wants to hit into someone. But there are designs that we have come to realize actually increase speeding behavior, and so addressing those design issues by right-sizing roads.
You know, as a comment to that, we utilize road diets in Elkhart, a few different locations, but one of them was in the River District. I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with it. We have a district that we wanted to slow traffic down. We actually wanted to move a volume of traffic, major streets. And, you know, I was a little concerned. Obviously, I got a lot of calls. Happened, the design of it happened at an office. I received calls at an office, but it was already designed. But just recently, I had an opportunity to walk across the street that we rode diet on. And it was so easy to cross it. I thought now I have a full understanding to why.
Yeah.
I mean, it was difficult to cross that street prior to the diet without really being careful about seeing traffic both ways. But it is ethical when it comes to walkability and utilizing the road a little bit different, much different than we've used it in the past.
And volume of traffic, you can move through 2 lanes plus a middle turn. It's very similar to.
So that you don't lose, there's a lot of time going from one point to the point. application. Yeah, we're kind of interested in getting application work.
Yeah.
The other piece that we don't often talk about is when you create roads that function better for people who walk and bike, not only are they safer for people who drive, but they're economically more efficient. And so you see sometimes the concerns from small business owners very concerned about people being able to get to and from the businesses quick. But what we actually see in research study after research study is increases in sales tax revenue on streets where road rates have been implemented, because traveling at a reasonable pace through those places actually encourages people to stop and shop, whatever. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Leah, you want to?
Yes, I know we're over to first time, just go over here. MACOG was awarded a $1.5 million brownfield grant. That will be available at the end of October. And look forward to continuing momentum in that program. This will give us about $400,000 extra than we've had over the last 4 years for the next 4 years. The next update is that the Goshen communities were awarded $1.2 million for 6 electric school buses. We're very excited about assisting the program. And another award is that the company received funding for some electric vehicles and expects to have their first electric vehicle in hand, Chevy Silverado, in July. So put a hold on July 11th. They'll have an unveil event somewhere announced soon.
Great, thanks. I'll let her step out, so I'll take her update. Office of Community and Rural Affairs has a new building in socially connected communities. There's a Surgeon General's report about the effects of loneliness on overall our personal health, and especially in our rural areas. And so this really looks at building more